It may be called the speech of the century. It really was a bombshell, and now we understand, frankly, if we reversed it and needed Netanyahu could win the presidency of the United States, I don't know how he's doing in Israel, but I think it gave him a boost. But what he said was so poignant when he said that, you know, the Jews for so many years had no place to go. They had no place to hide, and they were at the mercy of their oppressors. And he said, no more. And I think that's the rallying cry that we all realize, that this man was talking for the survival of his nation against an imperfect deal. And he warned of a nuclear nightmare. And he said it could happen if Iran gets a nuclear bomb and is free to do it. But the Obama plan won't stop radical Islam from going nuclear.
Netanyahu delivered his warning to a joint meeting of Congress, but as David Brody reports, the president and many Democrats didn't want to hear it.
The Prime Minister of Israel, His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu.
Applause and criticism greeted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before a controversial appearance in front of Congress. More than 50 Democrats stayed away, some because of upcoming elections in Israel, others because they felt Republican leaders snubbed the White House by inviting the prime minister without any notice. President Obama didn't even watch the speech. This didn't help the rocky relationship between the two leaders. But the prime minister took the high road, opening with praise for the president.
Some of what the president has done for Israel might never be known because it touches on some of the most sensitive and strategic issues that arise between an American president and an Israeli prime minister. But I know it, and I will always be grateful to President Obama for that support.
The main tension deals with Iran's nuclear program. In leading the negotiations, the U.S. is pushing to downgrade but not eliminate Iran's ability to make nuclear weapons. Netanyahu told Congress it's the wrong strategy.
This deal has two major concessions. One, leaving Iran with a vast nuclear program. And two, lifting the restrictions on that program in about a decade. That's why this deal is so bad. According to the deal, not a single nuclear facility would be demolished. Thousands of centrifuges used to enrich uranium would be left spinning. Thousands more would be temporarily disconnected, but not destroyed.
The White House has repeatedly said that they want a nuclear-free Iran. They just think that negotiations are the way to get there. Yet even White House officials admit that an actual deal with Iran on nuclear weapons is 50-50 at best. But after the prime minister's speech, the president questioned a lack of solutions on Netanyahu's part.
On the core issue, which is how do we prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, which would make it far more dangerous and would give it scope for even greater action in the region, the prime minister didn't offer any viable alternatives.
Add to the speech White House concern that Congress might pass additional sanctions against Iran. The negotiations are at a sensitive stage, and this strong argument couldn't come at a worse time for deal makers.
If anyone thinks this deal kicks the can down the road, think again. When we get down that road, we'll face a much more dangerous Iran, a Middle East littered with nuclear bombs, and a countdown to a potential nuclear nightmare.
Republican Senator Ted Cruz says the president's role of pacifist-in-chief is chiefly to blame for Israel's situation.
Do you believe he dislikes, first of all, Netanyahu? Do you believe he has antagonism towards Israel?
Undoubtedly. It is heartbreaking. This administration has been the most hostile U.S. administration to Israel in the history of our country.
And Cruz has harsh words for Democrats who didn't show up for the speech.
David, I'll tell you this. No friend of Israel would boycott a speech by the elected leader of Israel, particularly at a time of enormous peril.
Those words, enormous peril, are ones echoed by Netanyahu. His people remember the Holocaust, and he's determined to never let anything like that happen again.
I can guarantee you this. The days when the Jewish people remain passive in the face of genocidal enemies, those days are over. I can promise you one more thing. Even if Israel has to stand alone, Israel will stand. But I know that Israel does not stand alone. I know that America stands with Israel. I know that you stand with Israel.
David Brody, CBN News, Washington.
You know, there was said, and I say it again, in order to make a deal, you have to have an honest negotiating partner. There has to be somebody on the other end of the table who will keep his word. The Iranians lie, and that's part of their statecraft, is lying is part of the way they deal. Now look what they've done. First of all, they have established a state that is a theocracy. It has taken away the rights of citizens. It has abused their people. They have had tremendous offenses against the civil rights of their own people. Secondly, they have been the main sponsors of terror all around the world. They backed Hezbollah in Lebanon. They have backed Hamas in the Gaza. They have backed the rebel states in the Yemen area that overthrew the elected official of the country of Yemen, and have established what looks like an Iranian-sponsored Muslim dictatorship. They have planted countless IEDs in the pathway of our soldiers in Iraq and have killed thousands of them. They have also been involved in attacks on embassies around the world. They are, without question, the leading sponsor of terrorism. And what they believe, you must get it right, they believe in the theology, the eschatology of a final collapse of civilization that will only be stopped at the emergence of the Messiah they call the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, who will then begin to rule the entire world. And Jesus Christ, according to what they believe, will come back and acknowledge that Muhammad is God's representative on earth, and he now will say, I was mistaken when I defended the Jews, now I want to kill the Jews. Now that's what they believe. They also believe that before the Mahdi comes, there has to be an elimination of Israel, has to be an elimination of Christians. There has to be a bloodbath throughout the world. They believe that. That's at their core belief. Do you think for 1 minute that they're going to give up their nuclear ambitions? Of course not, because it's at the core of what they believe. And so for our negotiators to go in thinking that these people are going to keep their word, this is nonsense. They will cheat every chance they've got. And you tell me whether it'll be possible for international inspectors to get the way to Natanz or there are other places where they're enriching uranium and inspect their facilities and their centrifuges. It will not happen. So we should heed the warning of my good friend Bibi Netanyahu, because he's telling us the truth. And for the Democrats, a number of them not to show up, it was an affront. And I think that in terms of politics in America, this should be a game changer in terms of what party the Jewish people support henceforth. Well, in other news, could Obamacare be on life support after a challenge at the Supreme Court taking place today? John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau. Here's John.
Thanks, Pat. The president's health care law faces what could be its toughest legal challenge yet. And if the White House loses this case, some experts predict it could severely cripple the law and eventually cause it to unravel. Dale Hurd has the story.
4 words could doom the entire 2,000-page Affordable Care Act on a technicality. Those words, to be argued before the court today, are established by the state. Opponents say the law required individual states to create their own health care exchanges, but 34 states chose not to do that. So the Obama administration created a national health care exchange. If the court decides that violates the law, 5 to 7 million Americans might not be eligible to get subsidies from the federal government to buy health insurance.
If the court were to rule that the administration's interpretation was wrong, then there are 34 states where people would no longer be able to get these tax credits for buying coverage on the exchange.
And if those subsidies went away, experts say Obamacare could crumble because only the sickest people would join exchanges and premium rates would skyrocket. Lawyers for the government will argue against a literal interpretation of the law, saying the intent is clearly to help people in all 50 states get affordable health care coverage.
There's breast cancer in my family, so for me it was very important to get the affordable care so that I could go and get all of my preventive care.
After narrowly surviving a constitutional challenge in 2012, the fate of Obamacare is once again in the hands of 9 justices. Some Republicans say either way, they'll keep working to repeal the law.
It's bad for patients, bad for the providers, the nurses and doctors who take care of them, and terrible for taxpayers.
This is just one more example of a law that has had all sorts of unintended consequences and adverse effects for all sorts of people.
The Supreme Court's decision is expected to come down in June. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dale and Pat. A lot hangs in the balance here.
Well, again, the people who were selling, Jonathan Gruber, who had written the law and who was selling the law, said it's not a tax. It is not a tax. The Obama said it is not a tax. It isn't a tax. So when it got to the Supreme Court, the question was, did the Congress, under the Commerce Clause, have the power to regulate anything as diffuse as a relationship between a patient and his doctor? So Chief Justice Roberts bypassed that, and he said, well, it isn't Commerce Clause, it is a tax, and the Congress has the power to tax. Well, Obama had said it wasn't a tax. Gruber had said it wasn't a tax. They had told everybody it wasn't a tax. Now, Roberts comes out and says it's a tax, and that's what saved the law. Now it's coming back to him again, and he's pretty much a strict constructionist, and the constructionist says these benefits will be given to people in health care exchanges established by a state. Well, they have not been established by states. They've been established now by the president. And Roberts, he's got to come down on the side of the law. And that means we'll have a 5-4 decision. The liberals on the court are going to go with Obama, but you've got 4 who will go against it. So Roberts will be the swing vote, and it's going to depend on those words. But they have to construe the clear meaning of the law established by the state. That's what the law says. And what they can say, if you don't like it, you can change it. So go back and change it. And then you've got back to the House and the Senate, which is controlled by the Republicans, and they won't change it. Therefore, the major portion of the law will crumble. That's what will happen. And I don't believe that John Roberts is going to vote to say, well, we're going to ignore the clear language of the statute and make up our own. He isn't that kind of a judge. At least I hope not, John.
Pat, the House has voted to fund the Department of Homeland Security for the rest of the year, ending a dramatic standoff involving President Obama's executive action to protect millions of illegal immigrants from being deported. Republicans had wanted to use the funding bill to prevent the orders from taking effect, but Democrats successfully blocked their attempts. Some Republicans said House Speaker John Boehner caved, while others said he made the right move. The Islamic State released 4 more Syrian Christians from the more than 200 hostages they kidnapped in Syria last week. The Assyrian rights group Demand for Action and the Assyrian Charitable Association say the reasons for their release were unclear. Earlier this week, ISIS released 19 Christian hostages after they paid an Islamic tax for non-Muslims. ISIS still has at least 190 Assyrian Christians it's holding captive. Well, the United States has an oil problem. We have too much of it. The U.S. has so much crude oil that it's running out of places to put it, and that could drive oil and gasoline prices even lower in the months ahead. The U.S. has been producing and importing an average of 1 million more barrels of oil every day than what it's using. That extra crude is going into storage tanks, and it's pushing U.S. supplies to their highest point in the last 80 years, according to the Department of Energy. If this keeps up, storage tanks could reach their limits by the middle of April, and that could send the price of oil and gas down even more, with some experts saying oil could go as low as $20 a barrel. Pat, I'm sure no complaints there from consumers.
I wouldn't think so. I read, one of the experts analyzing what would happen to the Saudis, and that would be about their bottom line. That they could stand the pain down to $20 a barrel, but in the process, they would take out the shale producers in America, and they would also take out probably Nigeria, they would take out Venezuela, they would take out the tar sands up in Canada, et cetera, and then they would have a free shot to go ahead and raise the prices back up again for OPEC. But we have some laws, and I'm not as conversant with it as I should be, that prohibits us from a lot of exporting of our crude. If the Congress would change the law and let the producers, the free market take effect, we could begin to export into the international marketplace, and it would balance things out. And certainly we could stop importing oil. If we've got so much of our own, we could buy our own. But in any event, there is a real chance that when this happens, there's going to be a tremendous shakeout of oil companies. The so-called E&P, the Exploration and Production Group of oil companies, will be, gasping and hurting big time. John?
Pat, he's a former Attorney General of the United States. He served as the 50th governor of the state of Missouri and a former senator from the Show Me State as well. And on Tuesday, John Ashcroft was honored for his 10th anniversary at Regent University.
I am so grateful that as he retired from the office of Attorney General, that he graciously consented to come and be a distinguished professor at Regent University. And as our dean has pointed out, we had no conception. Not only is he a great politician, not only is he a servant of Missouri, not only can he sing country western music, but he's a tremendous teacher. And his students love him.
And Pat, as Chancellor, I know you've been thrilled to have someone with such a long and distinguished record of public service making a contribution to Regent for the last decade.
You can't believe how thrilled we are to have him on the faculty. 10 years of teaching, and the students just love him. And he's a real people person. He has hundreds of them in for dinner. He and his lovely wife, Susan, they entertain quite frequently. But he is a tremendous teacher, and the students love him. So that's one thing we have at Regent. We have a former Attorney General as a distinguished professor, plus we have a former Chief of Naval Operations, 4-star Admiral, as one of our distinguished professors. So Regent's got some pretty sharp people, and these guys love to teach. They really are good. So I honor John Ashcroft. We are delighted and honored that he would consider spending quality time at Regent University teaching our students.
I had a chance to go to one of those parties that he had at his home with his wife, and people don't know what a great pianist he is. He loves to sing, and he gets everybody around the piano. We had a great time.
Oh, he loves to sing. His wife is not Susan, it's Janet. Yeah, but she's a great cook. They both are.
Yeah, great cooks, and we're so happy to have them.
The Alabama Supreme Court has put a halt to same-sex marriage in that state. The justices are disagreeing with federal courts and ordering state probate judges to stop issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples. 6 justices on the court ruled the U.S. Constitution doesn't alter the judge's duty to administer state law. Alabama law defines marriage as between one man and one woman only, and the justices say a federal court cannot tell them to change that. 4 American missionaries detained in Venezuela last week are finally back at home in North Dakota. The missionaries from Bethel Evangelical Free Church in Devil's Lake were handing out medicine and hearing aids last Wednesday when they were detained. They were told they didn't have the required work visas, something that wasn't required in their last 14 years of missionary work in that country. They also learned Venezuela's president accused them of being spies. The missionaries say they hope to return to Venezuela someday. Remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.